When I say Big 3, what do you think of? You might think of something like this, or this, depending on who you are. Maybe your mind went straight to video games, and you thought of something like this.
That's why the PS3 is better than the Xbox 360.
Those are all good guesses, but today, we're looking at the Big 3 in fighting games. Street Fighter, Tekken, and... can you guess it? Go ahead, take your time. Okay, that's enough time. That's right, it's Guilty. In this video, we're talking about the black sheep of the fighting game family. We're going to explore how one of the largest fighting game franchises in the world is also one of the most criticized. This is Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat is a fighting game originally developed by Midway Games. Released in arcades in August of 1992, Mortal Kombat built upon the framework of titles like Street Fighter and Fatal Fury. From the digitized sprites of real-life actors to the over-the-top violence and iconic fatalities, Mortal Kombat was unlike any other fighting game during this time.
Scorpion wins. Fatality.
I remember spending a lot of time when I could playing Mortal Kombat, not being very good at it, but being like enthralled by a lot of the stuff that was in there. I was never one who was super into the gory side. That wasn't really what caught my attention. It was just that I loved the idea of fighting games in general. I mean, when I got to play Street Fighter 2, same way, I was just super into it. Something about the strategy, I think is what I would say, was just super interesting. And when I wasn't playing them, I would be thinking about them. But I was very interested in trying to play them well. So for Mortal Kombat, yeah, same way, I was super enticed by the original arcade game.
Mortal Kombat cemented its place in pop culture with its console release in 1993. The violence and gore was free publicity for Midway, as parents called on the game to be censored for its home releases. At the end of 1993, the United States Senate held a series of hearings about the violence being shown in video games and the potential impact it might have on children.
Handgun called the Justifier.
Front and center in these hearings was Mortal Kombat, and the end result was the creation of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or ESRB, which was tasked with rating games based on various age groups. Unfortunately for the nation's frightened baby boomers, the ESRB meant that Mortal Kombat 2 could actually increase the gore and violence. Since it was getting an M rating anyway, why not go all out with spine-shattering, head-exploding, face-melting insanity? After all, precious little Timmy still technically had to ask parental permission before buying the game. With 5 new characters, 2 fatalities per character, and special fatalities like babalities and friendships, Mortal Kombat 2 quickly became one of the most played video games in 1994, right up there with Street Fighter and the newly released Tekken.
If you look at other parts of the world, I think it's more different. At no point has it been one of the big 3 in Japan or in many other places. It's illegal. But in other places, like, it's been like the big one. Like if you go to Brazil, they are still playing MK3, UMK3 stuff from forever. They're still playing MK2 competitively. Like that's been one of the biggest fighting games there the whole time. So it like everything else, it depends on where and when you're talking about. But yeah, I think here and now it is, and certainly the gore is part of it. But I think that especially in more recent releases, the story's been a big part of it. The fact that there's a more robust single player experience in Mortal Kombat than in most fighting games. Not just about the story, it's not it. But there's more to do if you're not somebody who wants to play competitively. There's still like a lot going on. Crypt's always been there, but more than that. It's just there are towers. There's just a lot going on that other games don't have. So I think it appeals more than just to the gore.
The arcade and home release of Mortal Kombat 1 and 2 cemented the franchise as one of the most recognizable IPs in all of gaming. Unfortunately, Mortal Kombat 3 was not met with the same enthusiasm, at least not at the beginning. The original MK3 cut iconic characters like Scorpion and Katana, replacing them with guys like Sector and Sindel. But Midway quickly recognized their mistakes and released 2 subsequent versions of MK3 throughout 1996, Ultimate and Trilogy. These 2 releases changed the course of Mortal Kombat forever. Ed Boon calls Ultimate MK3 his favorite arcade MK game of all time, and it was a competitive staple for the franchise for years to come.
Certainly among the classic MK games, UMK3 was the most commonly competitively played. Again, even in the 2000s, I knew people who were still playing it. Well, I know people who still play it now. So that was the one, even while the 3D era games were coming out, that the people who I knew who played Mortal Kombat, playing that one.
While Mortal Kombat Trilogy would also release later that year, a console-exclusive version that appeased casual fans of the game by bringing back every character from previous games, Ultimate MK3 is seen as the definitive version. Mortal Kombat 3 and its 2 updates were a nice finale for the franchise as the gaming industry started moving in a new direction. Arcades were losing out to home consoles, and 2D animated sprites were being replaced by 3D rendered models. Unfortunately, this transition didn't go so smoothly for the King of Gore. To put it simply, Mortal Kombat 4 was a flop. Not only that, Midway also tried to broaden their horizons by expanding beyond the fighting game genre, releasing games like Mortal Kombat Mythologies, Sub-Zero, and Mortal Kombat Special Forces, which are widely considered to be some of the worst video games ever created.
Yeah, man, in the 2000s, it was not uncommon for us to just rip on Mortal Kombat. We would say things like, man, that game is, we would use it as a sort of comparative in a pejorative way. I wouldn't play that game. I would sooner play Mortal Kombat, something like that, right? It was the butt of a joke.
Although the main series games weren't that well received by the general competitive community and struggled to reach the same heights as its predecessors, Mortal Kombat still continued to draw in casual players and remained culturally relevant throughout the years. But after a string of poor performances from its spin-off titles, the next Mortal Kombat release would likely make or break the series. Thankfully for Ed Boon and the team, Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, released in November 2002, was a smash hit, selling over 1 million copies in its first 6 weeks. The first mainline Mortal Kombat game developed specifically for home consoles, Deadly Alliance boasted a plethora of single-player content, Conquest Mode and The Crypt, as well as an engaging multiplayer mode. After Deadly Alliance, Mortal Kombat was back. Their focus on single-player content proved to be a recipe for success, and Deadly Alliance's sequel, Mortal Kombat Deception, sold 1 million units in its first week and became the fastest-selling game in Midway's history. 4 years later, Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe sold nearly as many. But all things must eventually come to an end. For Midway Games, that end came on February 12, 2009, when the company filed for bankruptcy and was purchased by Warner Bros. Interactive. Keeping pretty much the same studio, Midway was renamed to NetherRealm Studios, and the first game in the NRS era of Mortal Kombat was the 9th main title game for the franchise. Titled Mortal Kombat, it was a soft reboot for the series. Mortal Kombat 9 saw the franchise return to its roots as a 2D fighter, with an added focus on single-player content. Using the lessons learned while developing Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, Ed Boon said, quote, "The dream for us was being able to tell a proper Mortal Kombat story. MK vs. DC was MK meets DC. And so, it was Batman and Superman and Scorpion. And the novelty was the crossover of the two things. When Mortal Kombat 9 came out, it was like, oh, we're going to come as close as we can to making a Mortal Kombat movie. These stories we've been telling through text, endings in the arcade, and other not as sophisticated forms of media, let's finally tell it in the cinematic." But while many reviewers considered Mortal Kombat 9 to be the best fighting game on the market at the time, it wasn't played competitively. At least, not at first.
And when Mortal Kombat 9 was announced, we heard that it was intended to be more of a competitive game. And many of us thought that was silly. There's no way Mortal Kombat's going to become competitive again. We just thought that was, PR, and that it wouldn't play out. And when it did come out, a lot of people tried it. A lot of people who I knew in the FGC did try it. I tried it, and I ended up really liking it. Some of my friends ended up really liking it. I would say most of them still didn't. Most of my friends in the FGC moved on from it pretty quickly. It kind of developed its own endemic scene shortly thereafter, right? There were players who sort of picked up MK9. It didn't come out to locals or majors at first, but within several months they were doing that, and they were doing well. But there was this kind of intermediate period where it's like people from the established FGC tried it out, most of them didn't stick with it, and then there was this big lull, and then more people started coming up who got into it because it was Mortal Kombat 9. That's why they got into it.
While Mortal Kombat 9 wasn't perfectly balanced, it marked Mortal Kombat's return to the competitive landscape, and subsequent releases have focused more and more on being competitively balanced. Unfortunately, the game's direction hasn't sat well with everyone.
For sure, animation and just sort of general graphics, style, all that sort of stuff, absolutely a big part of it. I think there's no doubt of it. I think that the animation has been getting better and better. But yeah, I thought it looked janky in earlier ones. I still think that part of it does. That's never been a big barrier for me. Just thinking about my favorite games, a lot of them are kind of on the jankier looking side. It's never really been a big issue for me, but I understand for people that it is. and that's fine. You know, you mentioned the Peacemaker gunshot. Most fighting games do animations in a more out there way, right? Like if you think about like how they look in Marvel or whatever, like they're just like very over the top animations. It's kind of what we're used to more. MK doesn't tend to do that, but in MK1, I think almost all the animations are good in my opinion. I think some of them look fantastic, to be honest. But yeah, you know, you if you're not in the MK scene, you sort of see like what the gunshot looks like, or some characters have like stanky leg normals in previous games.
While there are clearly some issues, Mortal Kombat had a fairly solid, albeit low-key, competitive scene. While it's easy to get concerned about the state of the scene based on entry numbers at big tournaments, part of the reason is due to the fact that many players prefer to compete online.
Yeah, I would love it if more people played MK competitively. On the other hand, a lot of people are playing MK competitively, and not all of them go to in-person events, but there are online events for this game constant. Every day there's some tournament going on, and they get entered a lot, and they get watched a lot. You know, it's never been the case that MK's had a big in-person scene. I went to my local for MK last weekend, and there were 4 of us, and there were 50 people for Street Fighter. But it's always been like that. And then you go online onto Combat League, and I've almost never run into the same person twice in Combat League. There must be so many people. I don't have them, but so many people playing. Whereas in Street Fighter, like I run into the same people not uncommonly. It seems like more people are playing MK if I had to guess online. They just don't come to the offline setting. So competitively, there are lots of people playing. It's not as apparent, right, as sort of the big numbers as Street Fighter or Tekken get at EVO, for example.
As for the players that do travel and compete offline, there's hope yet. Mortal Kombat 1 introduced the Mortal Kombat Pro competition, a tournament circuit for the game similar to the Capcom Pro Tour, which was set up to help the scene flourish in the modern age of fighting games.
I think they're great in the sense that they serve as outlets for the top players, or people who have put in a ton of time.
Ultimately, while Mortal Kombat may never match its fellow big threes on the competitive side of things, the success of the franchise speaks for itself. Whether you like it or not, Mortal Kombat has been one of the most popular fighting games in the genre, and a positive force in the industry, pushing for great single-player content and providing the kind of experience you might not find in other fighting games.
One thing I really like about Mortal Kombat compared to the other games is that it's different. I am very happy with the fact that the major fighting games are all really different from each other. I think it has been the case in, certainly before the 2010s, that a lot of the games that were out and big had a lot of big similarities. And in the last dozen years, totally they're a different story, which is awesome. So I think part of why talking about the big 3 doesn't strike home to me is that they're all different, but so are the other games that are big. So if you're a fighting game player, you get to make really different choices about which ones you care about, what you want in a fighting game, not just in terms of the competitive side, but the single player side and what the aesthetics are and all that sort of stuff. MK has a really different take on that, and that's part of why it sells really well. But it's also part of why some people don't play it. So both sides of it. But that's great. I think that's really cool.
With the franchise's storied history and its continued success, Mortal Kombat will be around for a long time. As co-creator John Tobias puts it, quote, "It's one of these things that it might have its highs and lows, and it might go away for a while, but all it needs is a quality iteration for it to come back. It'll always be here. If you look at any other pop culture phenomenon, like if you look at the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for instance, it became popular at the time right around when Mortal Kombat became popular, and it had its highs and lows. And here they are, once again talking about a major motion picture. That's because of its place in pop culture. It's always there for someone to pick up, polish off, blow the dust off it, and re-release it. And Mortal Kombat will always be that way. It'll be around 50 years from now." Shout out and thanks to Cloud, Steph, B, Pass, Shampoo, and Yashichi for being top patrons of the channel. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like, subscribing, and hitting the bell to stay up to date is much appreciated. My name is Jonah, thanks for watching.